Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of our Global Perspective Speaker Series for the fall. My name is Mark Wynn. I'm Vice President in the International Group here at the Dallas Fed and Director of the bank's Globalization Institute, which hosts these events in collaboration with our Communications and Outreach Department. In addition to being the first installment of the fall series, this evening's event also marks an important milestone, as it is the 50th event we have done since we launched this program in 2016. The first event featured then Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pallaz and then Bank of Mexico Governor Agustin Carstens. Subsequent events have featured former U.S. Treasury Secretaries Hank Paulson, Robert Rubin, and Larry Summers, business leaders such as Ross Perot Jr., Robert Taubman, and Ursula Burns, and even one astronaut, Ellen Ochoa, plus many more. We transitioned these events from in-person to the current online-only format in the spring of 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and look forward to resuming in-person events sometime next year. Our guest this evening is Sean Donohue, who currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the fourth busiest airport in the world. In his role as CEO, Mr. Donohue is responsible for the management, operation, future strategy, and development of the airport. As the Chief Executive, Donohue manages an organization with 1,800 employees and an annual operating budget of $800 million, as well as a $3 billion capital improvement program. DFW produces more than $37 billion in annual economic impact for the Dallas-Fort Worth region and hosts 64 million customers a year. In its 41-year existence, DFW has grown into one of the world's preeminent global super hubs, consistently ranking among the best large airports for customer service. It connects the North Texas region with nonstop service to more than 200 destinations on 5 continents. Sean took over leadership of DFW in October of 2013, following a 28-year career in the airline industry. Before joining DFW, he had served for 3 years as the Chief Operating Officer for Virgin Australia Airlines, where he led day-to-day operations for Australia's second largest air carrier. And that was following a 25-year career with United Airlines. This evening, Sean will participate in a moderated conversation with Rob Kaplan, who is the current president and CEO of the Dallas Fed. He was previously the Martin Marshall Professor of Management Practice and Senior Associate Dean at Harvard Business School. Prior to joining Harvard in 2006, Kaplan was Vice Chairman of the Goldman Sachs Group. He's the author of several books on leadership and management. He serves as co-chairman of Project ALS and co-chairman of the Draper Richard Kaplan's Foundation, the global venture philanthropy firm that invests in developing nonprofit enterprises dedicated to social issues. About 30 minutes into our event, we will be taking audience questions. If you would like to ask the speakers a live question, please click the raise hand icon on the control bar to enter the queue. If you would prefer to submit a written question, just use the Q&A button on the same bar to submit your question to the queue. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible and also try to address questions in the order in which they are received. And we apologize in advance if we don't get to your question. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Rob.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Mark has helped start this program back in 2016. And so, Mark, thank you for your leadership in this. And Jenna Dillenbach, who's off screen, has also been a key leader in this. So thank you for reaching 50. So we'll try to do another 50 over the next several years. Sean, it's great to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
And I thought we'd talk, Mark gave some of the revenues, employees of DFW Airport, but I wondered, just to start, a lot of people may not know exactly what the business lines and the nature of the DFW Airport business. I wonder if you could just start there and explain it to people.
Sure. Well, airports are governed to a large degree, Rob, by the FAA and guidelines from the FAA. And effectively, all U.S. airports are publicly owned in terms of, in our situation here, the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth own us. And when you look throughout the country, cities or states or authorities own all of the U.S. airports. Now, globally, many of the large airports are privately owned, but in the U.S., with the exception of San Juan Airport, there's been no privatization of airports. And basically the way it works is we as an airport cannot make a profit from our airline partners. It's a zero-sum game. So whatever it costs to run the airport, our operating costs, our debt service, that's what we charge the airlines, and we do not make money off that. We're prohibited from making money off that. Now, on the other hand, the converse is true. We will not lose money. The airlines will have to make us whole. Where we do make profits is what we call the non-aeronautical side of the business: parking, concessions, commercial development. But those profits we actually share back with the airlines to lower their costs. And then we keep some of it and put it into our capital program because, again, by FAA guidelines, it has to stay on the airport. All of the revenues have to be reinvested into the airport.
Okay, and you have a board of directors?
Yes, I'm very fortunate. One of the few airports in the U.S. that has a board.
Huh.
We've got a great board. It's 7 board members are from Dallas, 4 are from Fort Worth, and that reflects the initial investment into the airport 50 years ago, and Dallas put in a larger investment, so got the additional seats.
And how much have you grown over the last 20 years? Facilities, retail, revenues?
It's the strongest growth actually we've seen, Rob, up until the pandemic, obviously, was from about 2013 through 2019.
Yeah.
And that was reflective of Americans starting to significantly grow their operations here. But it was also reflective of a focus that the board and our team had on growing our international footprint here at DFW, because 7 or 8 years ago, we were not what you would call a global hub. We didn't have service, nonstop service to China. Now we, again, prior to the pandemic, we had nonstop service to Hong Kong and Shanghai and Beijing that we added. We added quite a bit more service to Europe and the Middle East. And those last 5 years of the previous decade, we were the fastest growing international large hub in the US. Now, that has been thrown upside down, as you know. All international travel has, but I'm glad that this fall, we're going to see new nonstop service to Istanbul with Turkish Airlines, who's never served DFW. And then American is going to start nonstop service to Tel Aviv, and we've never had nonstop service to Israel. So it is starting to come back, and international is really important to us.
So when your board says to you and you decide with your board you want to expand internationally, do you go meet and contact? That's how you do it. International carriers as well as domestic carriers, and say, and then what happens? They help, and you invest in terminals there. Or how does the process work?
Sure. Well, where we start, Rob, is we do a lot of analytical work to highlight to the airlines the opportunity. You know, how many passengers they can count on carrying every day, what we think the average ticket price will be, hopefully what their profitability will look like. So we have a team that does a lot of work on the analytical side, and we'll sit down with individual airlines, we'll share that data. They've got great data as well. Yeah. So typically we're comparing it. And then again, we're fortunate. Historically, we've done business trips to targeted areas. It could be Europe, it could be Asia. Typically, both the Dallas and Fort Worth mayors go on these trips, business leaders go on the trip, and we really go over there to promote the region. And those have been successful.
And what are you trying to get these airlines to do exactly? What do you want them to do at DFW?
Well, what we're looking for is to get on their radar screen. And And what we're trying to do is typically, over the last 20 years, when airlines were thinking of new international service, they would think East Coast and West Coast. They'd think New York and Washington and LA and San Fran. And for airports like DFW, it's a little bit more challenging geographically to make the story work for DFW, but we've been successful in doing that. And then most importantly, we want to sustain it. We want them to be successful.
And you have to build capacity for them?
We do, but we're fortunate that our international terminal, which is Terminal D at the airport, was built. It's our newest terminal. It's about 15 years old. It has good capacity right now. And even during the pandemic, we added 4 additional gates to that terminal to provide even more access.
And who pays for your CapEx? So CapEx to build that out is paid for by?
We go out, we issue bonds, and the airlines are responsible for the debt service on the bonds.
Got it. Okay. All right. It's interesting. You are known as a leading carbon neutral airport. Why don't you explain what I know carbon neutral means, but in this context, what does it mean to you?
You're right. An explanation is needed here. Airports worldwide measure their environmental progress, their carbon neutrality, and the way we measure obviously excludes aircraft, because we don't control the aircraft. What we do control, when you think of it in terms of our environmental footprint, we use an incredible amount of energy at DFW Airport, electricity, gas, and so forth. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we went down a path that 100% of the electricity we purchase is wind powered.
Wow.
So all of the electricity we purchase is wind powered. And Rob, a lot of people don't realize, and you would not think this would be the case in Texas, being all about oil and gas.
No, it's leader in
Texas
this
is
field.
the largest state in the US in terms of wind generation.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so we not only took advantage of that, Rob, but one item, you always get different points of view when it comes to sustainability. Do we have a commitment to be a better environmental steward? Absolutely. But it's good business. We've been able to reduce our annual electricity costs by $20 million by wind purchases, because we've been able to negotiate some of the credits that have been accruing to the providers because we're such a large purchaser. And one of the other examples, we have way too many buses at DFW Airport. It just drives me crazy how many buses are out here. But now all of our buses run on renewable natural gas. We partnered with a local company that takes the methane out of a local landfill, injects it into the gas, renewable natural gas. Again, saves us $1 million a year from what we were paying before. So we're committed to it. It's the right thing to do, but it's also good business.
All right. So let's talk about the impact, the impact of COVID. And let's talk about what it was through good part of 2020 versus how's it recovered on the leisure business side, international side. But what were you facing in 2020 in the aftermath of COVID?
Sure. It's interesting, and it's one of the, we all have experiences that we very much remember during 2020. And mine was on March 13th of 2020, I was in DC meeting with members of the White House, the administration, the FAA, the DOT. And at that point, there was a lot of discussion about federal support for airlines, and I'm delighted that happened. And I was making an argument that airports would probably need some financial support as well. And that night I'm in my hotel, and the announcement on closing the borders from Europe came out. And that's the night the NBA, I think, canceled their basketball season. Right. And then, having lived in Australia, it caught my attention that Tom Hanks was in Australia and announced he had COVID. All of those happened that same night. And I remember saying to the team, all right, all bets are off. And so what we did, because traffic just dropped like a hammer, we were serving 230,000 customers a day. In early April, it went down to 10,000. And as I was walking the terminals, it was eerie. It was very much similar to what happened after 9/11.
Yeah.
But what we focused on, Rob, was a couple things. Number one, our employees. I made an early decision, and I told our employees no one would be laid off. There'd be no changes to comp and benefit, and they could go home and tell their families they were going to be okay. Number two, we knew we needed to help our business partners. We deferred tens of millions of dollars in airline fees that they had to pay us. And then, Rob, you think of all the concessionaires out at the airport that run the restaurants and the retail. A lot of those are small companies. We knew we needed to help them, so we effectively eliminated their rent payments. And we wrote off tens of millions of dollars in rental payments that we never recovered. We knew we wouldn't recover, but it was the right decision to make. So focused on the employees, focused on our business partners. And then as we all saw, last summer started to pick up.
Right.
In the fall and winter, we saw the traffic drop. And then right now, this summer, Rob, we're back at 90% plus of what we saw in 2019.
And as I understand it, the bulk of that is leisure travel is actually greater, but business travel is materially less. You might go through the breakdown.
Sure. What's happened, to your point, is leisure travel has exploded. Everyone wants to see friends and family and go to the beaches and go to the mountains. And so that is actually over-indexed from 2019.
Yeah.
The two aspects of travel that have not recovered fully yet are international, long-haul international. International down to the Mexican beach locations is crazy busy.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, business travel. And I believe both of them will come back in 2023. And I actually think if we can hopefully make some progress with the Delta variant, we might start to see some of it recover more in the fall.
So let's talk about that. What happens? What's your sense? Obviously, none of us know. As we get through, we're thinking Delta variant will peak at some point, will start to tail off. We're hoping that there won't be other mutations, but there may be. What's your sense for what we're going to see in 2022?
Well, I have to admit, my prediction rate in the last year has been below the Mendoza line for those baseball fans out there. So, but if, to your point, if we assume we do make progress with more people getting vaccinated and we're able to fend off Delta and various other mutations that might happen, 2022, I could see leisure continuing to be strong. I could see business traffic maybe getting back to 75, 80% of where it was. The wild card will continue to be international because you just don't know how each country is going to do in terms of fighting the pandemic. I would say this: I could see Europe next summer setting all-time records in terms of travel, similar to what's happened this year, where people have just wanted to travel domestically. If the vaccine rates in the European countries continue to be high, in some cases they're higher than the US.
Yeah.
I could see people from the US just flocking over to Europe and Europeans wanting to come over to the US. It could actually set records, I believe.
do you expect after the summer ends into the fall, will leisure travel tail off?
It will, because it naturally tails off, kids back in school and so forth.
Yeah.
But as you know, we were talking before the call started, this hybrid work environment,
Yeah.
it has allowed people to travel and to keep working. And you know, that seems like it's going to continue through the fall. And so leisure, I believe, will continue to be stable. Hopefully business traffic will keep coming back. And most importantly, we'll beat this Delta variant or at least subdue it.
So you talked about over the years, one of your big priorities was international. As you sit here today and you talk to your board, for Dallas and Fort Worth leadership from both, what are your top 2 or 3 priorities from here over the next few years?
Sure. Well, we recognize, Rob, you know, at our core, we're an airport, and you know, we're here to serve hopefully 65 million customers next year and run a very safe and reliable operation. That's our core business.
Did you say 65 million?
Next year, that's our forecast next year. But we also recognize, as Mark said in the beginning, we're the second largest economic engine in the state of Texas behind the Port of Houston. And we account for almost 250,000 jobs if you count direct and indirect.
Right.
And in 2019, $12 billion worth of payroll. So we're an enormous economic engine, and we want to continue to grow, not for the sake of growth, but as you know better than most, the region is going to continue to grow. It sure seems like the region's going to continue to flourish.
Yep.
As an airport, we have to be out in front of that. We can never be a constraint on that. So, you know, as I mentioned, we added during the pandemic 4 more gates to the international terminal. During the pandemic, we reconstructed one of our main arrival runways because it was the perfect time to do that with operations down. And we did a lot of other work. And during the pandemic, Rob, we created 4,000 construction jobs. And those were critical jobs during the pandemic. And as we look forward over the rest of the decade, we just announced and our board approved in July, we are going to spend about $2 billion renovating Terminal C. It's the one terminal that has not been renovated and desperately needs to be renovated. Plus, we're going to add gates. We're going to add a pier of gates in Terminal C and a pier of gates in Terminal A, again, to continue to enable growth. And American has been a great partner with us on those projects because, quite candidly, they're going to pay for over 80% of those projects. So, and then as I look out further in the decade, our overall capital program will be about $6 billion. So a lot of investment, a lot of jobs, big part of the economy. And one item that the board pays particular attention to, Rob, and so do we, is as we create these opportunities, we want to make sure everyone has the ability to participate. And what do I mean by that? And I'm talking specifically about supplier diversity. So we measure when we have these billion-dollar contracts, we set goals and we require that minority and women-owned and disadvantaged businesses get a certain part of those contracts. And typically, you know, our expenditures are about $1 billion a year between debt service and O&M. And when you look at the amount of money we spend, 35% of that goes to minority, women-owned, and disadvantaged businesses. And then on the concessionaire side, if you look at all the revenues they bring in, 45% of those revenues go to minority, women-owned, and disadvantaged businesses. So that supplier diversity is really, really critical to us, Rob. It always has been something the board pays close attention to.
So do you like this job, or how does this job compare to being in the airline business? You're in the airline business for a long time. What kind of shifts have you had to make, and how do you enjoy this versus being in the airline business?
Well, the good news is it's still aviation, and I've had aviation in my blood for almost 40 years now. And what I really like about this job is the fact that, and I didn't realize it, even though I worked in airports for airlines. When you look at DFW, yes, running an airport, but we also have commercial development here where, take Amazon.
Yeah.
They have over 4 million square feet of warehouse space on DFW Airport. So you think of all the commercial development we do. You think of all the business partners we have in the community. You think about, as I mentioned before, the environmental work we're doing. So the fact that the job is much more than just aviation centric is probably what I enjoy the most about it.
Biggest problem you're facing right now?
Unpredictability. It's still difficult to manage when there's so much uncertainty out there. And I will be the first to admit, compared to most airports, we have recovered much, much faster. And again, credit to American for that, because they've really further invested in DFW Airport. But as we were talking about before, Rob, what's the fall going to look like?
Yeah.
What's the winter going to look like? What's 2022 going to look like? And when you have a multi-billion-dollar capital program and you're making those type of investments,
yeah,
you'd like a little bit more certainty. But we'll manage through it.
Worker shortages. Every business I talk to is struggling to hire workers. What have you seen in that regard?
Well, at DFW, we've been somewhat fortunate because, again, we didn't lay off people and we haven't really had to grow our workforce.
Right.
But concessionaires, very difficult time getting workers to come back to work at the airport. Other contractors that work at the airport, it has been a real challenge. And for those people on the call, the video today, my apologies, because I know as people travel, you're having to wait in line probably longer to get a cup of coffee than you did before. And I apologize for that. Everyone's trying to get workers back. We're trying to support the concessionaires as much as we can, but it is a real challenge.
Okay. Let's go to the audience, take some questions, and I'll weave some in as we go. Mark Wynn.
Okay.
Fire away.
Just a reminder, if you want to ask a live question, just click on the raise hand icon on the control bar at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And while we wait for people to do that, we can take some questions from the queue. First one here from Marvin Singleton, asking how the airport can help its clients, the airlines, achieve carbon emissions reductions. What do you see them doing over the next decade to meet goals on emissions?
Yeah, good question, Marvin. Thank you. Well, let me give you a concrete example. When we went out to the market and did all of our purchases for electricity to be wind, we went to American, who has a brand new headquarters campus on airport, and we said, would you like to participate with us? And they said yes. So now their entire campus is carbon neutral, I believe, because of what they're doing. So we're always looking at ways to partner. Certainly the biggest opportunity for airlines is when it comes to technology. And again, American is ahead of the game here because they've got the youngest fleet in the US, and the engine technology is where they can drive a lot of environmental gains. And so I know American, and I know all the other airlines are focused on that as well.
20 years from now, this is a dumb question, but will planes be running on jet fuel? Or are they going to be
Yes.
running on something else?
Well, and I'm not an engineer. I'm not an expert, Rob. But what I would say is this: when you think of a wide body international airplane, or even a larger airplane that's flying coast to coast, you're going to need Jet A fuel. I don't think battery is going to provide enough power.
Yeah.
There's talk about hydrogen.
Yeah.
And I know technology will continue to improve, but with the little I know, I could see, a combination of battery and electric aircraft that maybe have a range of a couple hundred miles.
Huh. Wow.
Could that be a solution? Sure, I think that could be. But, Jet A fuel is going to be here, and the real opportunity, and I know the airlines are looking at this, and we're going to be a partner, is sustainable aviation fuel. So sustainable aviation fuel still gives you the power you need for those engines, but it's obviously much more environmental friendly.
And what is in sustainable aviation fuel?
Well, a lot of it is a mixture of biofuel and ingredients like that.
Got it.
The challenge is, because it's not a mature market, the cost of sustainable jet fuel versus fossil jet fuel is about twice the cost. So we've got to get the economics to work to really see that take off.
Okay.
Okay, we've a couple of folks raise their hands. First in line is Ken Malcolmson. Ken, go ahead and ask your question. If you unmute first.
Yes, thanks, Mark. And Sean, great to see you. Thanks for being with us today. I've heard you speak in the past about the evolving global landscape of travel. Can you talk a little bit about that at a very high level, some of the factoids that you've shared with us in the past?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Ken. I'm on the executive board of a organization called the World Travel and Tourism Council, and we're focused on travel and tourism globally, and obviously tourism has been like aviation has been significantly impacted. But in 2019, travel and tourism accounted for 10% of global GDP. Just an enormous number when you think of, and this is not just airlines, but it's airlines and hotels and all the companies that are involved in tourism. It's a massive industry, a massive organization. So it has this, it did have it, and I think it will recover, this enormous economic impact. But I also think it's important to note it has this social benefit of bringing people together and having people connect and having people explore. And I've always felt, and I never felt it stronger than during the pandemic, there is a spirit to travel. The ability to connect with people and learn and see new places and see new cultures. And I'm very optimistic that's going to come back.
Great.
Okay, next up is Jason Later. Jason, go ahead and ask your question. Unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I guess the question I had is, are any of the airlines still on deferral on any of the rents? And the other question is, over time, have you ever paid a dividend to the city of Dallas or Fort Worth?
Sure, good question, Jason. The deferrals, I believe, ended this summer. So within the last month or two, those sunsetted. And then we are prohibited from paying dividends to Dallas and Fort Worth. Look at it, think about it this way. Any revenues that are on airport cannot leave the airport. They have to stay on airport. So we have to reinvest. But I guess it was probably 20 years ago before I came here. And for those of you who've been around longer than I have in the area, DFW Airport signed a deal because of oil and gas at the airport, and they started drilling and pulling it out of the ground. And today we're really not doing it very much. We're actually capping more wells than anything. But the airport got approval, a one-time approval, when that contract was signed to repay Dallas and Fort Worth from the proceeds of that deal for their original investment into the airport 50 years ago.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, Andrew Kelly. Andrew, if you unmute, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks so much for having me and for all the insights that you guys are dropping. My question is, what is DFW International Airport doing to help carriers with their tech ops or maintenance repair and overall programs to, keep those planes flying at pace?
Andrew, we do not get involved in the maintenance oversight of airlines. That is strictly their purview. Obviously, working very closely with the FAA. What we do provide is the facilities. So on the east and west side of the airport, there are massive hangar facilities that American primarily uses. And, that's our commitment, that whatever facilities they need to conduct that work, we will always provide that. But in terms of oversight of their maintenance program, that is outside of our boundary.
Okay, next, I have a question that was pre-submitted by Adam Hochschuler. Would enabling Love Field to operate direct international flights still pose a credible threat to DFW operations, airlines revenues, or has lifting of the right amendment to date shown that both airports can successfully operate given the high air travel demand from the DFW market?
Well, let me answer that a couple ways. Number one, I know there's a long history in DFW with the Wright Amendment and between the owner cities and the airlines and the airports, a lot of discussions and a lot of emotions over the last 20 years. I view Love as a partner. I'm not competing against Love Field. Anything we can do to support Love Field, we will do. And I know Mark Diebner, who's their airport director, feels the same way about DFW. I think the important aspect is we're one aviation ecosystem here. And it's really important to highlight that with American headquartered here and Southwest headquartered here in the region, we are extremely fortunate because you have two of the largest airlines in the world headquartered in this region. And I think we can all understand the impact of that. And then from an airport perspective, if you put Love Field and DFW together and you put them together as in terms of passengers and operations, we get very close to being almost the size of Atlanta, which is the largest airport in the country. But Atlanta, there's only one commercial airport there. They don't share with a sister airport. So again, Love is a partner. I want them to succeed. Obviously, we want to succeed, and we're extraordinarily fortunate that we got two really good airports, and we've got two of the largest airlines in the world based here.
Very good. Okay, another pre-submitted question from Michael Herman. Quote, I appreciate being able to prepay for terminal parking. However, I hate having to drive around looking for a parking spot. Are there Is there any thought being given to offering prepaid reserved spots or sections in the garages? And then a second part, which I think gets to something you talked about earlier, are there any plans to build a people mover outside of the secure area?
Okay. Well, for those of you who might not know, we introduced online prepaid parking at DFW Airport maybe 3 years ago, and the rates are probably 50% less expensive than a drive-up rate. What the questionnaire is referring to is earlier this summer, we screwed up. And what happened was during the pandemic, we allowed all of the employees who work at the terminals to park in the terminal garages. Obviously, there was plenty of space. You know, why force them to ride a bus when, you know, we could give them a better experience when volumes were down. We took advantage of that to reconstruct the employee parking lot, and the timing of the return of the traveler and how fast that happened, and the timing of doing the construction, the month of June, our capacity, our occupancy in our garages was higher than it's ever been, because we didn't have the chance to get the employees out before the rush of customers came in. The employees are out now, and we've got plenty of capacity, and that issue is resolved. Second part of the question, we are looking at in the future being able to create spots in the terminal garages where it could be reserved for people that make those reservations online.
Thank you. Another pre-submitted question from Gary Silverman. It used to be that if driving and flying would take the same amount of time, I'd fly. I could get things done while on the plane. I like the vibrancy of airports, and ground transport was readily available. Now I'm likely to drive, even if it takes several hours longer. Unknowns in time to get through security, lines to eat, Uber taxi issues, and deteriorating airlines customer service from what was already poor. What is the airline industry doing to try to get me back?
Well, let me talk primarily about aviation. And it has been a challenge at periods because the recovery has been so rapid, and no one estimated how fast the leisure traveler would come back. And you've probably all heard the stories about rental car rates being so high, and you know, the availability of the Uber and Lyft drivers is not what it used to be, and they're struggling to get people back, although I believe they're making progress there. In terms of that, the kind of the hassle factor at the airport, one of the areas that we really do focus on quite a bit is the security checkpoints. We don't run them, TSA runs them, but we're fortunate at DFW, we have 16 different checkpoints. If you travel around, a lot of airports just have these mega checkpoints. And, you know, if something goes wrong at that checkpoint, if there's a technology failure, it can be a nightmare. The fact that we have 16 and we disperse customers over 16, we're lucky. And then we've implemented some technology that in every one of our checkpoints, it will give you real-time information on the line wait. So we'll say it's a 9-minute wait, but what it will also say is 200 yards down the hall, there's another checkpoint with a 4-minute wait. And that allows customers to self-select. And so our security line waits are some of the lowest of any major airport in the US. And because we know that's a pain point, and we're going to continue to work on that. The other aspect of travel is, you know, once you get through, you know, how good of a job are we doing with the airlines to keep people updated with information? And in our new 4-gate addition in Terminal D, we're using some really innovative technology so customers, no matter where they are, get real-time updated information. So we're really focused on that as well.
And just jump in just to follow up. On a typical day, typical week, how often are you walking around the terminal?
Yeah, a couple of times a week. That's my goal. Sometimes I do a little bit more, sometimes I do a little bit less, but that's where you get a pulse of the operation, and you get a pulse of, what sense of anxiety do you see with the customers? You get a pulse on, how are all the restaurants and retail doing? I keep a close eye on, how clean does the terminal look? I keep a close eye on the condition. And that's why I said earlier, I can't tell you how happy I am that we're finally going to renovate Terminal C, because those roller boards on those tiles in Terminal C drives me absolutely crazy.
Yeah. So can I ask you one other follow-up to that? So we've been surprised at the Dallas Fed, we track high frequency data, as Mark Wynn knows, on mobility and engagement. And we didn't know how people would react to the Delta variant. But what we've seen is mobility and engagement haven't improved, but it also hasn't deteriorated. You're obviously walking among people every day that are getting on planes. What have you learned about behaviorally, the way people have adapted to COVID? What are you seeing that we can learn about consumer behavior?
It's been fascinating, Rob. The first aspect of that was last summer. When travel started to return a little bit last summer, I was expecting customers to be nervous. But what was interesting last summer, the people who were traveling, they wanted to travel, and they felt, relatively comfortable. And then as we got through the fall and winter, we started to do customer research intercepts once the vaccine came out. And as we got into this spring, we saw that people traveling had a higher vaccination rate than what was being reported in the general public, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're going to take a trip, you're probably more likely to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
So up and through this spring, I would tell you that I didn't see a lot of traveler anxiety. June and July, I started to see more traveler anxiety because now things were really busy. The terminals were busy, the airplanes were busy, the restaurants were busy. And that's where, you started to get a little bit of a sense that people were saying, holy cow, where'd all these people come from? We didn't expect it. Now, again, we work really close with the airlines and try to have as good a forecast as we can. Yeah. We tried to prepare as much as we could. But I would say, over the last couple of months, I've actually seen more anxiety than I did during the earlier parts of the pandemic.
And in the last week or two, traffic trends stable, deteriorated a little bit?
About mid-August, because of when schools go back, we always see travel fall off.
Right.
So I'm not too worried about that. I believe the most important metric is going to be, how does September and October look? And so that will be really key. And again, hopefully, we make progress with the Delta variant, and more importantly, we get more people vaccinated.
Okay. Back to you, Mark.
Another question on the climate change issue. Are you seeing any immediate impacts of climate change on the airline business through more frequent weather disruptions? The Financial Times ran a story on this, I think, yesterday or the day before.
I would say yes. In terms of weather occurrences at DFW, and again, I can only give you 7 or 8 years worth of experience here. No one likes the couple of years where we were in a drought and we were so desperate for water. But from an airport aviation perspective, that was actually a pretty good run for us, because there weren't as many storms. I can't scientifically tell you that the frequency of storms in DFW is greater right now. Everyone has an opinion on the storm in February. But what I can tell you is when we look at data on the amount of weather delays at the airport, it has been steadily going up over the last couple of years.
Another question on the airline business more generally. Do you have any comments or insights on the degree of competition in the US air travel market compared to, say, Europe or other countries where there's more low-cost carriers?
Well, I would say, and again, I'll try to put my old airline hat on. We are very fortunate in the US that there are so many choices. I mean, we have the largest domestic market in the world, although China will probably overtake the US in terms of just purely domestic travel. And when you think of the four largest airlines, American, Delta, United, and Southwest, I mean, they compete like heck. I mean, they are going after each other all the time. And then you look at the low-cost carriers, they are growing actually faster than the four big carriers. And then just this year, amazingly, we had two startups launch, ultra low-cost carriers, launching during the pandemic. So I know there's a lot of talk about, the big four airlines, but take DFW. Yes, American has 80% of the traffic here, but they're not only competing against the 20% of the other airlines, they're competing with Southwest at Love Field. And again, those carriers compete, aggressively with each other. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that when you index for inflation, ticket prices actually have not gone up, I think, in 20 years. And that's the most indicative metric I think you can use in terms of competition.
Another one from the queue. Do you see there as being any scope for another major airport of the size of DFW or Houston Intercontinental in Texas over the coming decades, given how rapidly the state is growing? Or do we have more than enough capacity as it is?
Well, very good question. I would say this. Austin is, I believe, one of the fastest growing cities in the US. The airport just announced a major expansion within the last couple of months. A lot of new service going into Austin. The distinction, though, is in Austin, most of that traffic is carrying customers from Austin to another airport. And that's what we call point-to-point traffic. The distinction with DFW and also Intercontinental is, 2/3 of the traffic at DFW is connecting. And the power of these connecting hubs is enormous. And the power to bring people from Stillwater to fly down here to get on an American flight to London Heathrow, that's what other airports that are doing point to point, they won't have that ability. So do I see, airports like Austin and probably San Antonio growing? Yes. Do I see them getting to be like a mega hub like DFW is? No, I don't see that.
So can I ask a little bit about that? So there's a lot of discussion that with the airport or expansion, you have to think about infrastructure generally, roads. And you're right, Austin's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And one of the challenges I know their leaders are focused on is traffic. And so how involved do you get in and consulted on highways, road capacity, train capacity to deal with this influx?
Rob, we actually pay quite a bit of attention and work with quite a few partners here. And for example, when it was announced several years ago with high-speed rail between Dallas and Houston, I'm a huge proponent of that. Yeah. And why is that? Because I would rather have aircraft coming in and out of DFW that are going international or going to Boston or LA than taking up airspace on a 42-minute flight to Houston. There's more efficient ways of moving that traffic. So I hope that happens. I think it would be a benefit for the region, be a benefit for us. In terms of the roadways, it's interesting. We just started about a year ago a digital twin project with the National Renewable Energy Lab up in Golden. And what they're doing is they're looking at all the ground traffic surrounding DFW Airport, and they're going to model it so that we can understand better the dynamics of and the infrastructure investments we're going to have to make at DFW in the future to accommodate that traffic. And we have 133 bridges at DFW Airport. We have 1,200 lane miles of road.
Wow.
So when it comes to infrastructure, it's more than just, runways and taxiways and terminals. And we believe this digital twin will give us a lot of good information on how we can plan more effectively in the future.
A question from one of my colleagues here at the bank. What keeps you up at night?
Well, other than just turning 60, I guess from a professional perspective, it goes back to what does the next 24 months look like? And I am so optimistic for this region and for DFW as an airport when I look out through the decade. But we need to continue to be flexible to manage through this unpredictability. I have a great team, an outstanding board of directors, Mayor Johnson and Mayor Parker, who just got elected in Fort Worth. They're adding tremendous value. So we've got the governance, we got the team. I just wish the crystal ball was a little bit clearer in the next 12 to 24 months.
I'm going to ask you in our last few minutes a question I ask every person who appears on this. You're very much a leader in the community. I know you do a lot in the community. You work with, as you just went through, the mayors and community leaders. We've got a large group of people listening and watching this today who either are running companies or nonprofit leaders, they're civic leaders. But the one thing they have in common, they're interested, the fact they're plugging in, they're interested in the economy and our communities and making a difference in the world. What advice would you give the leaders who are listening at this stage on what we all could do to make a bigger impact on in our community right now?
Well, Rob, what I've learned from our team, to be quite candid, is when it comes to ensuring, anybody who wants an opportunity to be successful at DFW, how can we help them? Again, the small companies, they're just starting. They're trying to build capacity, and we do a lot of work to help educate people how to work at DFW, because it can be a pain in the butt and it's far too bureaucratic. And how can we work with our partners who have made it and encourage them to help the smaller companies and get them moving? And that's why supplier diversity is so critical to us, and it will continue to be critical. And then the second part of that, I would say, is our focus on our employees, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've had strong programs there. We're really focused on ensuring everyone feels like they belong here at DFW, that we support them, that we listen. And we're just kicking off what we call allyship training for all of our employees, so that we can be advocates for our employees that need help, and we can amplify their voices. And so those would be the two that I would say, and I've learned a lot from other companies that are doing great work there. But we'd like to see everyone be successful as DFW grows. And I think there's a lot of business leaders out there that feel the same way as the region grows.
Sean, thank you for being here with us. I think you're a great leader. I think you're widely thought of as an outstanding leader, and we're very lucky to have you running DFW Airport. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being with us here tonight.
Thanks, Rob. It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Apologies if you submitted a question that we did not get to. You'll soon receive a survey asking for feedback on this event, and we would very much welcome your candid responses. We hope you'll be able to join us for some of our upcoming Global Perspectives events in the coming months, which will feature investor Jeremy Grantham, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Federal Reserve Board Governor Lael Brainerd, and former Reserve Bank of India Governor Raghuram Rajan. Details on how to register for these events can be found at dallasfed.org. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a good evening.